Good evening. The Home Secretary has acknowledged for the first time that the government is unlikely to bring net migration to the levels it had hoped for before the election. Theresa May told the BBC that the Conservative target of reducing numbers to below 100,000 a year had been blown off course. The latest figures show that net migration, the number of people moving to the UK, minus the number leaving, is at 243,000. Today, Mrs May said the government had managed to reduce immigration from outside the EU, and she hoped negotiations would address the numbers arriving from within Europe. Here's our political correspondent, Ian Watson.
It's an inconvenient truth. The Prime Minister wants to do more to control immigration. But he can't stop many migrants from the EU at our borders. So it's becoming less clear how he'll cut net migration to the tens of thousands, a pledge which he made in opposition and repeated robustly in government.
No ifs, no buts. This is a promise we made to the British people, and it is a promise we are keeping.
But today the Home Secretary admitted the Prime Minister's pledge most probably won't be met.
It is, of course, unlikely that we're going to reach the tens of thousands by the end of the Parliament. Why is that? It's because we've seen increasing numbers of people coming from across Europe, partly because our economy is doing better than other economies of Europe, and we've been doing what we can in relation to EU migration, but there is, of course, more to be done.
The Lib Dems refused to endorse the immigration pledge, and Labour say it should never have been made in the first place.
He did say no ifs, no buts, and now the Home Secretary is saying it's unlikely. I think the better word would be absolutely impossible.
Net migration, the difference between the number of people coming here and those who leave, was at its highest in 2010. But it never went down to the tens of thousands, and at 243,000 now, it's close to its peak. That's why David Cameron will soon be setting out plans on how he will limit migration from other European countries to Britain. But it's not that easy. Both the German government and the European Commission here don't want him to water down the key principle of free movement of labour inside Europe. But he thinks he's found a middle way, that he can negotiate further, tighter restrictions on benefits. EU rules say that migrants shouldn't be a burden on the host nation, so the Prime Minister's likely to say there's scope to restrict access to so-called in-work benefits, such as tax credits and help with housing costs.
At the moment, in-work benefits, which in the UK are very generous and immediate for EU migrants, act as an effective subsidy, a taxpayer-backed subsidy for EU migrants to perform low-paid jobs in the UK. If you take that away, you also take away quite a bit of the financial incentive to come here in the first place, and that, I think, will also have an impact on numbers.
But some voters here in Conservative-held Harrogate are sceptical that politicians' words are going to be met with action.
If I thought they were going to implement what they were saying, I'd vote for them, you know what I mean? But I don't think they do.
I've historically always voted Conservative, but as I said, you know, I haven't made my final decision yet, but it will be a factor this time.
I don't have any issue with immigration at all. I just have an issue with the Tories. Sorry.
Under threat from UKIP, the Prime Minister will have to convince voters that he can make an impact on migration without leaving the EU.
Ian Watson reporting in Ian's Live in Westminster for us now. Your final point there, Ian, about how the government's going to have to be careful and realistic in what it can offer on immigration in the future.
It does, Michelle. You may recall, of course, that it used to be distasteful for mainstream political parties to mention immigration. With the rise of UKIP, they now think it's essential. They're falling over themselves to come up with new policies. We heard there from Open Europe, a Eurosceptic think tank, an influential one with close links to ministers. They're saying more can be done to restrict access to benefits without having to leave the EU. And Labour are also looking at restricting new migrants' benefits for up to 2 years. But when the Prime Minister finally gives his much-heralded immigration speech, many of his own MPs are going to say, Michelle, that this simply isn't going far enough. Now, perhaps unhelpfully for David Cameron, tomorrow, a man who until recently sat round the cabinet table with him, Owen Paterson, is going to say that Britain could prosper by leaving the EU, that renegotiation is unlikely, and in fact, if you really want to control immigration, you have to be outside the European Union too. And David Cameron's also going to have to convince sceptical voters that this time he really is serious about change. That's far more difficult to do when we're going to probably see immigration figures going up later this week, and when the Prime Minister's missed his own migration target.
Ian Watson in Westminster, thank you.